The morning of Monday, November 18, 2024, began at 5:15 like most of my court mornings did. I stood in my kitchen in Mason Falls, Ohio, in thick gray socks, waiting for coffee to finish dripping into the navy mug that still had a tiny chip on the rim from my father's house. Rain tapped against the window over my sink, the kind of cold November rain that made every tree outside look darker than it really was. I ate half a piece of toast, read the docket once more, and expected nothing from that day except the usual parade of noise, excuses, and hurt feelings. By 8:07, I was walking up the courthouse steps on Walnut Street with my umbrella tilted against the wind and my leather briefcase tucked close under my arm. Our courthouse is an old limestone box from 1931 with creaky floors, brass door handles, and radiators that hiss like they are arguing with the winter. My clerk, Marisol Vega, was already at her desk when I came in, neat as ever in a burgundy sweater, her dark hair pinned up with a pearl clip, a legal pad lined up exactly with the edge of her keyboard. She looked up at me and said, "Morning, Judge. Quiet docket, unless traffic court gets rowdy again." And I smiled because quiet dockets are often the ones that fool you. Bailiff Thomas Reed was pouring himself bad vending machine coffee in the hallway, and the air inside the courtroom carried that mix I know too well of wet wool, old paper, lemon cleaner, and nerves. Outside my chambers, people shuffled in with umbrellas, unpaid tickets, code violations, and that same look people wear when they hope maybe life will let them off easy just once. I straightened the stack of files on the bench, adjusted the cuff of my charcoal suit, and touched the silver pin at my collar that had belonged to my father. At 9 sharp, I took the bench and began what I thought would be a very ordinary day. At 9:42 a.m., Marisol called case number 24, CRB 1187, City of Mason Falls versus Staff Sergeant Owen Mercer, age 33, charged with petty theft in the amount of $46.13 from Bell's Market on River Street. On paper, it was a simple case, the kind that usually takes 7 minutes if everyone answers plainly and nobody tries to perform for the room. Then he walked in from the side door, and I knew before he reached the defense table that nothing about him was going to be simple. He was tall, maybe 6'2", broad-shouldered but thinned down by stress, with rain darkening the shoulders of an olive field jacket and a folded flag wrapped in clear plastic held against his chest like something alive. If you'd been sitting where I was sitting, looking at that man and that flag, what would your heart have done before your mind caught up? Would you have seen a thief first or a brother? I still ask myself that question. His hair was cut short but not fresh, the kind of grow out you see on men who used to keep regulations without thinking and now have too much else to worry about. A pale scar ran from the corner of his left eyebrow into his temple, and the skin under both eyes had that hollow gray look that comes from too many sleepless nights and too much coffee standing in for meals. His boots were army issue, polished out of habit but cracked at the sides, and his hands were large, rough, red from cold, with a healing split across the right knuckle. He stood straight because his body remembered how, but grief had bent something in him that no posture could hide. I asked him to state his name for the record, and his voice came out low and steady. "Owen David Mercer, Your Honor." I asked if he understood the charge, and he said, "Yes, ma'am, petty theft," with the kind of clean, respectful tone I hear from school principals, firefighters, and men who were raised to answer adults without making trouble. Then I asked the question I always ask, whether he had counsel, and after a pause that lasted just a shade too long, he said, "No, ma'am, I could not afford one." Assistant City Attorney Nolan Pierce sat at the state's table in a navy suit that always looked too sharp for a Monday morning and pushed his file forward. He began to read the report in that flat voice lawyers use when they want facts to sound heavier than people. On November 6, 2024, at 8:18 p.m., the defendant left Bell's Market carrying unpaid merchandise, including 2 cans of soup, 1 bottle of children's fever reducer, 1 loaf of white bread, 1 jar of peanut butter, 1 carton of eggs, 1 box of vanilla cake mix, 1 package of candles, and 1 bottle of orange juice. When stopped outside by store staff, he surrendered the items without resistance and admitted he did not have the money to pay. I have heard hundreds of versions of "I needed it" from that chair, and most of the time the sentence lands on the floor exactly where it belongs. But when I asked Mr. Mercer where he was currently living, he looked at the flag before he answered me. "Red Oak Motor Lodge until last Tuesday, Your Honor. Room 12, after that my truck. I glanced at the address line in the file again, and there it was in Marisol's careful note from intake, no fixed address. Any dependents? I asked, and that was the first time his face changed. His jaw tightened, his throat moved once, and he shifted the flag a little higher against his coat like he was protecting it from a draft no one else could feel. Yes, ma'am, he said. My niece, Nora Mercer, she's 7. The room was still busy with little sounds then, a cough in the back, a chair leg scraping, Thomas turning a page by the door, but after he said her name, even those sounds seemed to pull back. I asked him why he had brought the flag into the courtroom, and for the first time, he looked straight at me. His eyes were blue, but tired enough to make them look almost silver, and there was no anger in them, only shame and a kind of stubborn tenderness. My truck got impounded at 7:10 this morning for expired registration, he said. I don't leave this with strangers anymore. Then after a breath, he added, it was my brother Eli's. Nora asked me to take him with me so nobody would think I was a bad man. If you have ever sat in a room with a stranger and suddenly felt your own life brush up against theirs, tell me in the comments, not because I need noise, but because pain gets lighter when people stop pretending they have never seen it before. That courtroom was full of strangers, and still, by then, nobody in it felt untouched. I slowed everything down right there. I asked Nolan Pierce to set the police report aside, and I looked back at Owen Mercer the way my father taught me to look at a witness when truth is standing just behind the first answer. Mr. Mercer, I said, start at the beginning of that night. He swallowed hard, glanced once at the gallery, and then nodded like a man stepping onto ground he was not sure would hold. He told me Nora had gone home from Lincoln Elementary at 1:30 that afternoon with a fever of 102.1 and cheeks so red they looked burned. The motel had already changed the lock after he fell behind $86 on the weekly rate, so he had been keeping their clothes in the truck and sleeping in the cab when she stayed with a church volunteer named Denise Porter. He said he had $11.42 left after buying gas and cough drops, and he kept trying his debit card at the register anyway because sometimes hope makes people do foolish math. When it failed the third time, he asked the cashier to remove the cake mix and the candles, but Nora had asked for those because November 7th was her father's birthday, and he could not make himself leave them behind. As he spoke, I watched his hands. Some people fidget when they lie, but he held himself still the way people do when they are trying not to come apart in public. He said he packed the unpaid food back into the bag himself because the cashier was busy, and he walked outside in a fog, not planning to run, not planning much of anything at all. Then the night manager came after him, and he turned around and handed over the bag before the man even asked. The file said he admitted the theft on the spot, and he did not deny that. What he denied quietly was the part the report left out. I asked them if they could keep the cake and take the rest back, Your Honor. I asked if I could just take the fever medicine to her. They said no. His mouth trembled then just once, and he looked down at the clear plastic over the flag like he hated himself for saying the next part out loud. I know what stealing is, he said. My father taught me better, and the Army sure did too. But my niece was burning up, and the only thing in my truck was a half-pack of crackers and a bottle of water that had frozen the night before. I was trying to decide which kind of shame I could live with. If you believe a person can do a wrong thing for a right reason and still deserve to be seen clearly, hit like and stay with me. That belief has been tested in my courtroom more times than I can count. That day, it was tested down to the bone. I asked about his brother then because by that point the flag in his arms was speaking almost as loudly as he was. He closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them again, the room felt smaller. Specialist Elijah Mercer, he said. Everybody called him Eli. He was 27 when he died on June 3, 2022, during the evacuation work outside Hamid Karzai International Airport. The name settled over the room like dust after something breaks. Owen told me he and Eli grew up on Barclay Street in Dayton with a mother who worked nights at St. Agnes Laundry and a stepfather who drank his paychecks before the rent was due. He said Eli used to be the skinny little shadow behind him, all elbows and big brown eyes, always tagging along with skinned knees and untied shoes. When I was 15 and he was 9, Owen said, I started making his school lunches because our mother would fall asleep at the table after the late shift and nobody else was going to do it. Then he gave a short, embarrassed smile and said he liked too much mustard even as a kid. He enlisted first, right after high school, because the house felt too small and too loud and too hungry. Eli followed 6 years later, not because Owen wanted him to, but because younger brothers do not always listen to love when it sounds like fear. We served one tour apart, then ended up in the same region, he said. He used to call me old man, even though he was only 6 years younger. There was a tiny breath of laughter somewhere in the gallery at that, the sad kind that comes when a dead person suddenly feels present. When Eli died, the Army brought him home wrapped in formality, polished shoes, and folded words. The funeral was on June 14, 2022, at 11 a.m. at Pine Ridge Cemetery, and the flag was placed into the hands of his wife, April Mercer, who was 31 then and trying not to collapse in front of their daughter. Owen said Nora was 5 and kept asking why everyone was whispering if her daddy was sleeping. I promised him at the graveside I would help them, Owen said. I said it under my breath so nobody would hear me break. He came home for good in January of 2023 and took a job pouring concrete with Haskins Construction for $22 an hour. April got sick in March of 2024, stage 4 ovarian cancer that had already spread farther than any family should have to hear from a doctor. By September 29, 2024, she was gone too, and before hospice took the last of her strength, she pulled the flag from the shelf over her bed and pressed it into Nora's lap. She told her, "This is your daddy's courage. When you are bigger, it will be yours to keep." When Owen became Nora's temporary guardian on October 3, 2024, everything in his life turned into forms, deadlines, and waiting rooms. His construction job let him go after he missed too many shifts for hospital visits and school pickup, and the state aid he applied for was still pending by the time the motel locked them out. He sold his fishing boat first, then his television, then his wedding band from a marriage that had ended years before, and then every piece of furniture in storage except one plastic tub full of Eli's pictures and Nora's winter clothes. The flag and her inhaler are the last two things I keep where I always know they are, he said, so softly that Marisol stopped writing for a second just to look up. Then he told me about the night of November 6th in a voice so steady it hurt to hear. Nora had fallen asleep against his shoulder in the truck outside St. Matthew's Church after a volunteer checked her temperature and said they needed medicine before the fever climbed any higher. Rain was knocking against the windshield. His gas light had been on since 5:40, and the truck heater only worked when he pressed the pedal a little. She woke up and asked if we could still make Daddy's birthday cake tomorrow, he said, and the sentence cracked right in the middle. He said he carried her into Bell's Market because she was shivering, but she got dizzy under the bright lights. So he sat her on the front bench near the claw machine and told her to wait there for 2 minutes. He grabbed the cheapest things he could find, even putting back a $6.99 box of chicken strips because he could not justify it. When the card failed, he felt every eye in the line on his back, and he heard Nora cough from the front of the store, that dry little cough children get when they are trying to be brave for adults. So I made the worst choice I have ever made while fully awake, he said. He did not say it for pity. He said it the way some men confess in church, not because they think it will save them, but because they are too tired to carry the lie any farther. I thought if I got the medicine to her and got out fast enough, maybe I could come back in the morning and beg to work it off. He licked his lips, looked at the floor, and added, I know that sounds small and desperate. That is because it was. By then, Wanda Bell, the store owner, was sitting in the front row of the gallery, waiting to be called if needed. She was 61 with silver hair twisted into a tight bun, a forest green cardigan buttoned all the way up, and both hands wrapped around her handbag so hard the leather had started to crease. I had noticed her before, but I noticed her differently when Owen said his brother's name again. Her face had gone pale and her lower lip had started to shake. What comes next is the part you need to hear all the way through. Do not step away yet, because the truth in that room was still opening, and none of us had reached the center of it. Some moments ask more from us than attention, and this was one of them. I asked Owen why Nora had wanted him to bring the flag to court that morning. He looked down at it, and when he answered, his voice was not a soldier's voice anymore. It was in the truck when the tow truck came, he said. She was crying because she thought they were taking her dad, too. Then he gave the kind of smile that only happens when love and pain are standing in the same place, and he said, she kissed the plastic and told me, Uncle Owen, carry Daddy in there so they know we are good people. Nobody moved. The old radiator hissed once. A paper cup rolled somewhere in the hallway, and from the back row I heard one woman sniff hard through tears she was trying not to show. Owen finally looked up at me, and his eyes were full now. I failed that little girl, Your Honor, not when my brother died, not when April died. I failed her when I could not buy soup and medicine without becoming the kind of man I promised I would never be. Before I could say another word, Wanda Bell stood up. Nolan Pierce turned toward her with that annoyed look prosecutors get when witnesses stop following the expected path, but she did not even glance at him. Your Honor, she said, one hand flat against her chest, may I speak now? Her voice was thin, but it carried. I told her she could. She took 2 small steps forward, looked straight at Owen Mercer, and asked, did your brother Eli have a scar on his chin from falling off a dirt bike when he was 13? Owen stared at her, stunned, and nodded once. Wanda shut her eyes, and when she opened them again, they were wet. My son Aaron Bell was at that airport with him, she said. He came home because Eli Mercer shoved him behind a concrete barrier before the blast hit. She pressed her trembling fingers to her mouth, then lowered them and went on. Aaron tells that story every Memorial Day. He says a young man from Ohio with brown eyes and a crooked grin saved his life. The courtroom was so silent I could hear Marisol breathing. Wanda turned toward me. The night manager filed the complaint because that is policy. I was not there that evening. If I had been, this man would have left with groceries and a full tank of gas. Then she faced Owen again and said, your brother gave me more years with my son. No bag of soup is ever going to outweigh that. Owen's shoulders jerked once like he had been hit, and he lowered his head over the flag. I have handed down thousands of rulings, and I knew before I spoke that whatever I said next would stay with everyone in that room for a very long time. I looked at the file, then at the man holding his brother's flag, then at the woman whose son had lived because of that brother, and I heard my father in my head as clearly as if he were standing behind my chair. The law is a strong hand, but if it has no heart in it, all it knows how to do is squeeze. That was the exact moment I decided I would not let the law forget what it was for. If there is someone in your life who thinks mercy is weakness, share this story with them when we are done. Share it with the veteran who feels invisible, the single parent hanging on by 2 fingers, the person who has made one bad choice at the end of a very long rope. Sometimes people need proof that compassion can still sit in an official chair. I asked Nolan Pierce whether the city wished to continue in light of the complaining witness's statement and the defendant's full cooperation. To his credit, he did not fight me for the sake of pride. He stood, cleared his throat, and said, given the circumstances and Ms. Bell's request, the city moves to dismiss. I could have stopped there, but I knew this man needed more than a technical ending. So I picked up my pen, looked directly at Owen Mercer and said, Mr. Mercer, what you did on November 6th was wrong, and I will not tell you otherwise, because hungry children do not become less hungry when adults lie to them. His eyes lifted to mine. But I also will not pretend this courtroom exists only to punish people after life has already punished them past reason. Then I leaned forward and let every word land slowly. This court dismisses the charge in the interest of justice. Further, I am ordering immediate referral to the County Veterans Assistance Office, Emergency Family Housing Services, and guardianship support through the clerk's outreach desk before this man leaves the building today. And because dignity matters too, the record will reflect that Mr. Mercer surrendered the property, cooperated fully, and came before this court carrying not defiance, but grief. My voice shook a little on that last line, and I did not care who heard it. For one long second, Owen did not move at all. Then his knees bent just slightly, as if his body had prepared for a blow and could not quite understand why none had come. He covered his mouth with the back of his hand, still holding the flag with the other, and tears spilled down a face that had probably not allowed itself that release in a very long time. Behind him, someone in the gallery began to cry openly, and Thomas Reed had to look down at the floor before calling the next matter because even our bailiff was not made of stone. When I recessed for 10 minutes, I stepped down from the bench instead of retreating to chambers. That is not something I often do, but some mornings demand a human voice before they need a judicial one. Owen stood near the rail like a man afraid the floor might give way if he shifted his weight, and up close he looked even more tired than he had from the bench. I told him quietly, "What Nora said was right. Good people can get cornered. Your job now is to let people help." He nodded so hard it almost looked painful. Then he said, "Your Honor, I do not know how to thank you without sounding weak." I told him I'd start by getting that little girl a warm place to sleep tonight and a cake tomorrow, even if it is late. At that, his mouth twisted into the smallest real smile I had seen on him all morning. Marisol took over like the force of nature she can be when somebody needs saving from paperwork. Within 20 minutes, she had veteran services on speakerphone, a family shelter voucher on her desk, and a volunteer from St. Matthew's Church driving over with a booster seat for Nora. Wanda Bell pressed a store gift card worth $200 into Owen's hand and told him not to insult her by refusing it. I watched all of it from my doorway and thought how strange it is that sometimes a courtroom does its best work after the official part is over. If you know someone carrying a loss they never talk about, send this to them, not because a video fixes grief, but because being seen can keep a person from falling 1 inch farther. I have watched that happen with my own eyes. 3 weeks later, on December 9th, 2024, Marisol came into my chambers holding a red envelope and grinning before she even sat down. Inside was a Christmas card covered in blue glitter and crooked snowflakes drawn with a heavy child's hand. On the front, in purple marker, were the words, "Thank you for helping my uncle keep my daddy." Inside, Nora Mercer had drawn a triangle flag on a judge's bench and given me hair that looked much nicer than mine actually does. By January 15th, 2025, Owen had a part-time security job at Bell's Market and a small 2-bedroom apartment on Carson Avenue through a veterans housing grant. Wanda Bell told me later that he was the first employee to show up every day 10 minutes early, even when the sidewalks were ice and the heat in his old truck still only worked on left turns. Nora had her own room painted pale yellow, a backpack hook by the door, and a shelf where the folded flag sat in a wooden case above her father's photograph. On Eli's birthday, a week late but full of love, they baked the vanilla cake together and lit one candle for the man who should have been there to blow it out with them. What happened next reached farther than that family. Wanda created a small emergency shelf near the registers called Eli's Corner, where veterans and guardians could quietly take soup, medicine, diapers, or bread if they hit a hard week. No forms, no lecture, no bright sign shouting charity at people already ashamed. Just a note in her handwriting that said, "If you need it, it is yours today." Our court changed too. By March of 2025, Marisol and I had worked with the county to start a veterans resource table every Wednesday morning for anyone coming through on minor charges, housing trouble, or family paperwork. We could not solve everything, and I would never pretend we could, but we stopped acting as if a courtroom should only notice a problem after it has already turned into a charge. The last time I saw Owen in person was Memorial Day, May 26, 2025, at the small ceremony in Riverside Park. He stood straighter then, healthier, still scarred, still carrying grief, but no longer wearing it like wet wool that never dries. Nora was beside him in a white dress with blue flowers, holding his hand with one fist and a paper poppy with the other. When the band finished, she ran up to me and whispered, "Judge, Uncle Owen says we are okay now," and I had to blink very hard before I trusted my own face. A year later, on June 14th, 2026, the 4th anniversary of Eli's funeral, I received another letter. Owen wrote that he had started night classes in social work because he wanted to work with veterans leaving the service and families who had lost someone overseas. He said he did not want anybody else standing in a grocery aisle trying to decide which kind of shame they could live with. At the bottom in Nora's careful 3rd-grade print, she had added, "I still let Uncle Owen borrow Daddy when he has hard days." Before I tell you what that case finally taught me, I want to ask you something. When you heard that a soldier walked into my courtroom carrying his brother's flag, what secret did you think was coming? Did you expect rage, revenge, some hidden crime? Or did you hope, even a little, that grace was still possible? My father used to say, a robe can hide a person if you let it. It can make you love order more than truth, procedure more than pain, and punishment more than repair. So I want to say this to you plainly the way I would say it if we were sitting across from each other with coffee between us and no clock on the wall. Be careful what story you tell yourself about a person before they finish speaking. Be careful how quickly you call somebody careless, weak, criminal, lazy, or lost when you do not know what they carried into the room. And if you have any power at all in your job, your home, your church, your classroom, your family, use some of it to make sure the law in your own hands still has a heart. If this story stayed with you, stay with me a little longer and come back for the next one too. There is another case I still think about, the night a teenage boy came into my courtroom wearing his dead father's shoes, and what his little sister said changed the whole room. I will tell you that one next.